The cold came down from the mountains like a living thing, and Quinton Xavier knew with absolute certainty that anyone caught in the open tonight would be dead by morning. He had been tracking the injured doe for 3 hours when the temperature plunged, watching his breath turn to frost in the air as the sun disappeared behind iron-gray clouds. The deer had escaped, vanishing into the forest with his arrow still lodged in its flank, and now Quinton faced a far more serious problem. The old trapper's cabin he had been aiming for was still 2 hours away, and the wind carried ice crystals that stung his face like needles. He had provisions for one night, a single wool blanket rolled tight in his pack, and the grim knowledge that winter in these borderlands showed no mercy to the unprepared. The first flakes began to fall as he pushed through a stand of pine trees, their branches already creaking under the weight of gathering ice. Quinton pulled his collar higher and quickened his pace, boots crunching through the hardening snow. He was a veteran of the northern campaigns, 26 years old, with the weathered face of someone who had spent too many nights sleeping rough, and he knew how to read danger in the sky. This storm would kill. That was when he saw her. At first he thought it was a fallen log or a boulder covered in moss. Then the shape moved and Quinton's hand went instinctively to the hunting knife at his belt. Green skin, broad shoulders. The distinctive profile of an orc, hunched against the base of a massive oak tree with one arm wrapped around her middle. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. Orcs were the enemy. They had been the enemy his entire life. The war had officially ended 3 years ago, but raids still happened along the frontier. Farmers still bolted their doors at night. Children still learned to fear the green-skinned warriors who emerged from the forest to burn and pillage. But this orc was not raiding anyone. She was dying. Quinton approached slowly, hand still on his knife, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of a war party. Nothing. Just the rising wind and the snow falling harder now, already beginning to accumulate on the ground. The orc woman did not move as he came closer, though her eyes tracked him with dull awareness. She was young, perhaps barely into adulthood by orc standards, with the characteristically green skin that looked almost gray in the fading light. Small tusks protruded from her lower jaw, and her pointed ears were pressed flat against her skull. Blood had frozen in dark patches across her leather armor, and one leg was twisted at an angle that made Quinton wince. "You understand me?" he asked, keeping his distance. The orc woman's eyes focused on him with difficulty. "Go," she said in thickly accented common. "Leave me. You will be dead in an hour. Then I die." Her voice was steady despite the obvious pain. Orc way, better than human mercy. Quinton looked up at the sky. The snow was falling in earnest now, thick flakes that obscured the trees barely 20 feet away. He thought of the cabin, of the fire he could build there, of the safety of 4 walls and a roof. He thought of his commanding officer during the war, who had told him that the only good orc was a dead orc. He thought of the village he had grown up in, burned to ash when he was 12, the smoke rising black against a summer sky. Then he looked at the orc woman again, at the way she held herself with dignity even as she shivered uncontrollably, at the resignation in her dark eyes. "What happened to you?" he heard himself ask. "Fell." She gestured weakly at the slope above them. "Hunting. Rock gave way." "Your clan?" "Moved south 2 days past. I stayed to track elk." A bitter smile twisted her mouth. "Foolish." The wind howled through the trees, and Quinton made a decision that he knew might haunt him. He unslung his pack and pulled out the wool blanket, the only thing standing between him and hypothermia if he could not reach shelter. The orc woman's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Being an idiot, probably." Quinton shook out the blanket and moved toward her. She tensed, and he saw her hand twitch toward the bone-handled knife at her belt. "Easy. I am not going to hurt you." "Why?" The question came out harsh and suspicious. "Why help?" "Because I have seen enough people die." Quinton knelt beside her and began wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, tucking it carefully around her injured leg. She was larger than him, broader through the shoulders and chest, and he had to adjust the blanket twice to cover her properly. Her skin was ice cold to the touch. "And because if I leave you here, I am no better than the monsters we told ourselves orcs were." She stared at him with an expression he could not read. Up close, he could see details he had never noticed during the war, when orcs had been faceless enemies charging across battlefields. The delicate point of her ears, the way her tusks curved slightly upward, the intelligence in her eyes sharp and evaluating despite the pain. "You will freeze," she said. "Probably not. There is a cabin about 2 hours northwest. I can make it if I move fast." Quinton finished securing the blanket and stood, brushing snow from his knees. "The storm should break by morning. If you survive the night, head east. There is a stream about half a mile that way. Follow it south and you will find your way back to orc territory." He turned to go and her voice stopped him. "Human." Quinton looked back. "What is your name?" "Quinton. Quinton Xavier. I am Vorgha." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and something like wonder crossed her face. "Why do you do this?" "Because somebody should." He adjusted his pack, already feeling the cold seeping through his coat without the blanket's protection. "Try to stay awake. Move your fingers and toes. It will hurt, but it will keep the blood flowing." "Quinton Xavier." Vorgha said his name slowly, carefully. "I will remember. Just stay alive." "That will be enough." He made it perhaps 100 yards before the reality of his situation became clear. The temperature had dropped so precipitously that ice was forming on the trees, and the snow was now falling so thick he could barely see 10 feet ahead. His hands were already numb despite his gloves, and his feet felt like blocks of wood in his boots. The cabin was too far. He would never make it in these conditions. Quinton stopped, standing in the swirling white chaos of the storm, and laughed at his own stupidity. He had given away his only chance at survival to save an orc woman who should have been his enemy. His commanding officer would have called him a fool. His fellow veterans would have spat at his feet. And yet, as he turned and began trudging back toward the oak tree, he found he did not regret it. If he was going to die tonight, at least he would die as a decent man. Vorgha looked up in shock when he emerged from the snow, and her hand went to her knife again. "You came back. The cabin is too far." Quinton dropped his pack and began gathering deadfall branches from around the tree, anything dry enough to burn. "We are going to have to survive here." That blanket is big enough for 2 if we are not particular about personal space, and I am very motivated not to be particular right now." He piled the branches in a rough circle, trying to shield them from the wind with his body. His fingers were so cold he could barely feel them, and it took 3 tries to get his flint and steel from his pack. Vorgha watched him struggle with the fire for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "There is a hollow, behind the tree, more shelter." Quinton looked where she indicated and saw it, a natural depression in the earth where the oak's massive roots had created a small cave-like space. "Can you move?" "If you help." Getting her into the hollow was an exercise in controlled agony. Vorgha was heavy, all muscle and solid bone, and her injured leg made her cry out when Quinton lifted her. He gritted his teeth and half carried, half dragged her the few feet to the shelter, settling her against the back wall where the roots formed a natural windbreak. She was breathing hard, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. "Sorry," Quinton muttered, gathering his pile of branches and relocating them to the entrance of the hollow. "I know that hurt. Pain means alive." Vorgha's voice was strained but steady. Orcs saying, "Humans say that too. Or at least the stubborn ones do." This time the flint caught, and a tiny flame began to lick at the driest kindling. Quinton fed it carefully, building it up piece by piece until he had a small but steady fire burning at the mouth of the hollow. It would not last all night, but it might keep them alive long enough. He turned to find Vorgha holding out the blanket, one edge extended toward him. "Share," she said simply, "or we both die." Quinton hesitated only a moment before moving to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She draped the blanket over both of them, and he was immediately struck by two things. First, how much warmer it was with their shared body heat trapped beneath the wool. Second, how strange it felt to be this close to an orc, to smell the unfamiliar scent of her, earthy and sharp like pine resin. "Thank you," he said quietly. Vorgha made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You give me your blanket, come back to share death with me, and you thank me." Humans are strange. Some of us, maybe. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire flicker and listening to the storm rage outside their tiny shelter. Snow was already piling up at the entrance, helping to seal them in. Quinton knew he should be terrified, trapped in close quarters with an orc, but all he felt was tired. Bone deep, exhausted, tired. "Your leg is badly broken," he said eventually. "Do you want me to set it?" Vorgha shook her head. "In the morning, if we live. When we live." Quinton did not know why he felt the need to correct her, but the words came out firm. "We did not come this far to die now. You speak like orc." There was approval in her voice, defiant to the end. "I spent 3 years fighting orcs. Maybe some of it rubbed off." "Where did you fight?" "Mostly the eastern marches, some in the Grimwood. I was with the 3rd Infantry." Quinton fed another branch to the fire, watching sparks spiral up into the darkness. "I saw the worst of it. Ravenhold, the Battle of Broken Ridge, the siege at Whitestone." Vorgha was quiet for a long moment. "I lost 2 brothers at Broken Ridge. I am sorry." "Are you?" She turned to look at him, and in the firelight her eyes were more bronze than black. "You killed my brother's killers, or tried to. Do you regret it?" Quinton thought about it honestly. "I regret the war. I regret that we could not find another way. But no, I do not regret defending my people. Same as you do not regret your brothers defending theirs." Honest words. Vorgha nodded slowly. "Most humans lie. Say orcs started the war, say we are monsters who wanted only blood. Some humans believe that. Some orcs probably believe humans started it." Quinton shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position against the hard roots. "The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Border disputes, old grudges, leaders who wanted glory. The usual reasons men find to kill each other. And yet you saved me. And yet you are sharing your blanket with me. Maybe we are both bad at being enemies." Another sound that might have been a laugh. Vorgha leaned her head back against the roots, exhaustion clear on her face. "My clan will not believe this. Vorgha, they will say you always were strange, too curious about humans, too interested in their songs and stories. You like human songs, I heard them. During the war, your soldiers would sing at night around their fires. I would creep close to listen." She smiled slightly, showing her tusks. "Beautiful songs, sad songs, songs about home and lovers and fields of wheat under the sun. Orcs do not have songs like that. Our songs are all about battle and glory and the strength of our ancestors. I could teach you some if you want to pass the time." Quinton surprised himself with the offer, but once it was out he found he meant it. "Help keep us both awake. You would share human songs with an orc. Why not? It is not like either of us is going anywhere." He thought for a moment, trying to remember something appropriate, then began to sing softly. It was an old song his mother had taught him, about a farmer who loved a girl from the next village. Simple words, simple melody, but it spoke of ordinary love and ordinary dreams, of building a life together one season at a time. When he finished, Vorgha was staring at him with an expression of wonder. That is beautiful. So sad but also happy. Humans are complicated. Everyone is complicated. Even orcs, I am guessing. Yes, she said it quietly. We are not monsters. We love, we grieve, we hope. But humans only ever see the warriors, the raiders, never the mothers and children, never the farmers and craftsmen, never the people who just want to live. Quinton felt something shift in his chest, some old certainty cracking and reforming into a new shape. I see you, he said. Right now I see you. Vorgha met his eyes, and the moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had words for. Then she shivered, and the spell broke. You are still cold, Quinton observed. The fire is small, and the wind steals the heat. Without thinking too hard about it, Quinton put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer against his side. She stiffened immediately, and he started to pull back, but then she relaxed, leaning into his warmth. This is strange, she murmured. Very strange, he agreed, but effective. If my clan saw this, they would exile me. Humans and orcs do not touch except in battle. If my people saw this, they would probably hang me. Orcs are monsters, they would say. You cannot trust them. Quinton felt her solid weight against him, the rise and fall of her breathing. They would be wrong. Maybe we are both traitors to our peoples. Or maybe we are just two people trying not to freeze to death, and everything else is noise we do not have to listen to right now. Vorgha made that almost laugh sound again. You are strange, Quinton Xavier. Strange and kind. I did not know humans could be kind. I did not know orcs could like sad songs. He tightened his arms slightly, sharing more of his warmth. We are both learning new things tonight. The storm intensified as the hours crawled past, the wind howling like a living creature trying to tear apart their shelter. Snow piled higher at the entrance, until only a small gap remained for smoke from their tiny fire to escape. Quinton fed the flames carefully, rationing their limited wood, knowing he would have to go out eventually to gather more. Vorgha drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain from her leg and the cold making it hard for her to stay alert. Each time she started to slip away, Quinton would talk to her, tell her stories about growing up in a small farming village, about learning to track and hunt from his father, about the ordinary rhythms of a life before the war. She would rouse, listen with half-lidded eyes, and sometimes tell him stories in return. She spoke of the great orcish clans that ranged across the northern territories, each with their own customs and histories. She described the summer gathering, when all the clans came together to trade and feast and celebrate under the stars. She told him about her mother, a warrior of great renown who had died in the Battle of Ravenhold, and her father, a craftsman who made beautiful things from bone and stone. He taught me to see beauty, she said at one point, her words slightly slurred with exhaustion. To look at a stone and see the shape hiding inside it, to understand that destruction is easy but creation is sacred. He sounds like a wise man. He wept when I joined the war band. Said I was choosing death over life. But what choice did I have? The humans were coming. Everyone had to fight. I am sorry. Quinton did not know what else to say. I am sorry for all of it. Not your fault. Not my fault, just the way of the world. Vorgha's eyes drifted closed again. Stupid, wasteful, sad world. Hey, Quinton shook her gently. Stay awake. Talk to me. Tired. I know, but you have to stay awake. He looked at the fire, saw it was burning low, and cursed under his breath. I need to get more wood. Too dangerous. We do not have a choice. Quinton carefully extracted himself from the blanket, and the cold hit him like a physical blow. His breath frosted immediately, and he could feel his fingers going numb within seconds. "Keep the blanket. I will be quick." He crawled to the entrance of the hollow and began digging through the snow, creating a gap large enough to squeeze through. The storm had transformed the world into an alien landscape, everything buried under white, the trees invisible beyond a few feet. Quinton found a dead branch within reach and dragged it back, then another, working frantically against the cold that was seeping into his bones. When he crawled back into the hollow, Vorgha was watching him with concern. "You are shaking. Just cold." His teeth were chattering so hard he could barely speak. "I am fine. Come here." She lifted the blanket, and Quinton did not argue, pressing close against her. She wrapped the blanket around them both and then, to his shock, put her arms around him, holding him against her chest. "You are ice. I will warm up." But he was shaking uncontrollably now, his body trying desperately to generate heat it did not have. Vorgha held him tighter, and he realized with surprise that she was warm, far warmer than he was. Orcs ran hot, he remembered hearing during the war. Something about their metabolism, their bodies built for the harsh northern climates. "Thank you," he managed to say between shivers. "You gave me your blanket. You came back. You shared your warmth." Vorgha's voice was soft above his head. "Least I can do is keep you alive, Quinton Xavier." He buried his face against her shoulder, too cold and too tired to be self-conscious about it. She smelled of leather and blood and something else, something earthy and clean. Her arms were strong around him, solid and sure, and slowly, very slowly, he began to stop shaking. "Better?" she asked after a while. "Better." Quinton lifted his head and realized how close their faces were. He could see every detail of her features in the firelight, the texture of her green skin, the small scars that marked her jaw, the way her tusks caught the light. "Vorgha." "Yes." "I am glad I found you." Something flickered in her eyes, an emotion he could not quite name. "I am glad too. Even if we die here, I am glad I met you. A kind human, who would have thought, a thoughtful orc. Who would have thought?" He smiled slightly, and she smiled back, and the moment felt impossibly fragile, a tiny spark of connection in the vast cold darkness. They stayed like that, wrapped around each other under the single blanket, feeding the fire branch by branch through the endless night. At some point, Quinton dozed off, exhaustion finally overcoming his determination to stay alert. He dreamed of green fields and summer sun, of a world without war, of a woman with tusks and kind eyes who laughed at his terrible jokes. He woke to gray light filtering through the gap in the snow and realized with shock that they had survived. "Vorgha." He pulled back to look at her, and relief flooded through him when her eyes opened. "We made it. The storm broke." She looked toward the entrance where dawn was creeping in, pale and cold but undeniably there. "We lived. We lived." Quinton felt giddy with the simple fact of it. "Against all odds, we actually lived. Because of you." Vorgha said it firmly. "I would be dead without you. We would both be dead without each other. Call it even." He crawled to the entrance and began clearing away the snow, digging a tunnel until he could push through into the morning. The world outside was transformed, buried under at least 2 feet of fresh powder, the trees bent and heavy with ice. The sky was clearing, though, blue patches showing between ragged clouds, and the wind had died to a whisper. "How does it look?" Vorgha called from inside the hollow. "Cold but survivable. We need to get you to shelter, somewhere I can properly set that leg." Quinton thought quickly, orienting himself by the sun. "The trapper's cabin is still the closest option. It is going to be a hard journey. I can make it. You cannot walk on that leg. Then you will help me." She said it with such simple confidence that Quinton found himself nodding. "Yes. I will help you." It took time to get organized. Quinton rekindled the fire and melted snow for water, which they both drank gratefully. He had a little dried meat in his pack, which he split between them. Vorgha tried to refuse her share, but he insisted, and she finally accepted, tearing into it with the hunger of someone who had not eaten in days. "When did you last have food?" he asked. "3 days, before I fell." 3 days, Quinton stared at her. "How are you even conscious?" "Orc constitution. We can go longer without food than humans, but yes, I am very hungry." She managed a weak smile. "Do not suppose you have any more, I wish. But there will be supplies at the cabin. The old trapper always kept it stocked for emergencies." He hoped that was still true. "We just have to get there." Getting Vorgha out of the hollow was the first challenge. Her injured leg could not bear any weight, and even with Quinton supporting most of her bulk, every movement caused her to gasp in pain. By the time they stood outside in the snow, both of them were breathing hard. "This is going to be a very long 2 hours, Quinton said. "Then we should start walking." Vorgha leaned heavily on him, her arm across his shoulders. She was taller than him by a few inches and significantly heavier. And Quinton knew within the first few steps that this was going to test every bit of endurance he had. They moved through the snow at an agonizing pace, Quinton breaking trail while supporting Vorgha's weight, Vorgha gritting her teeth and forcing herself forward step by painful step. The sun climbed higher, bringing no warmth but at least visibility. Quinton navigated by landmarks he remembered from yesterday. A distinctive rock formation, a lightning-struck pine, the gradual descent of the land toward the creek valley where the cabin stood. An hour in, Vorgha stumbled, and they both went down in the snow. Quinton pushed himself up immediately, but Vorgha lay still, her face gray with pain and exhaustion. "I cannot," she said. "I am sorry, I cannot keep going." "Yes, you can." Quinton moved to help her up, but she pushed his hands away. "Leave me here. You can send help back once you reach the cabin." "There is no help to send, and I am not leaving you." He grabbed her arm, pulling insistently. "Get up, Vorgha, get up or we both freeze." "Why?" She glared at him, frustration and pain making her voice sharp. "Why do you care? I am nothing to you." "Just an orc, the enemy." "You are not my enemy." The words came out louder than Quinton intended, echoing across the snowy forest. "You are not my enemy," he repeated more quietly. "You are someone who needed help, someone who shared her warmth when I was freezing. Someone who likes sad songs and knows about finding shapes in stones. You are Vorgha, and I am not leaving you to die in the snow." She stared at him for a long moment, and then something in her expression shifted. "You really mean that? Every word? Humans?" She shook her head, but she reached out and let him pull her to her feet. "Strange and stubborn," says the orc who climbed out of a hollow with a broken leg. They kept going. The sun was high overhead when Quinton finally spotted the cabin through the trees, a small structure of weathered logs with a stone chimney. He could have wept with relief. Vorgha was barely conscious now, her weight dragging more heavily with each step, her breath coming in pained gasps. Quinton half carried, half dragged her the last 100 yards, using reserves of strength he did not know he had. The cabin door was unlocked, as was the custom in the deep frontier, and Quinton shouldered through it into the dim interior. There was a rough bed in one corner, a stone fireplace, a table and 2 chairs. Supplies were stacked against one wall, covered in dust but still there. The old trapper had been a man of his word. Quinton eased Vorgha onto the bed, and she collapsed back with a groan of relief. "We made it. We made it." He was already moving, gathering wood from the pile beside the fireplace, striking his flint to get a fire started. Within minutes, flames were crackling cheerfully, and the temperature inside the cabin began to rise from freezing to merely very cold. "Let me look at your leg," he said, returning to the bed. Vorgha nodded wearily. Quinton carefully cut away the leather of her boot, revealing the injury beneath. It was bad. Her lower leg was swollen to twice its normal size, mottled with dark bruises and bent at an angle that made his stomach turn. Setting this was going to hurt her terribly, but it had to be done. "I need to straighten it," he said. "It is going to be extremely painful." "I know." Vorgha gripped the edge of the bed. "Do it quickly." Quinton found a leather strap among the supplies and gave it to her to bite down on. Then he positioned himself, grasped her leg above and below the break and pulled. Vorgha's scream, even muffled by the leather, was the worst sound he had ever heard. He felt the bones grind and shift under his hands, felt them settle into alignment, and quickly bound the leg with strips of cloth and 2 straight branches to hold it in place. By the time he finished, Vorgha had passed out, her face slick with sweat. Quinton slumped back, his own hands shaking. He had set broken bones before during the war, but never on someone he cared about. And he realized with a start that he did care about Vorgha, this orc woman he had known for less than a day. Cared about her in a way that felt dangerous and foolish and absolutely undeniable. He spent the rest of the day making them as comfortable as possible. He found dried meat and beans in the supplies, along with flour and salt, and even some honey. He made a thick stew, heating it over the fire until the cabin smelled like food and warmth. He melted snow for water, refilled the woodpile from the shed outside, and spread his blanket over Vorgha where she lay unconscious. As the sun set, she finally stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Quinton, I am here." He brought her a bowl of stew and helped her sit up enough to eat. She was ravenous, finishing the first bowl and accepting a second, color slowly returning to her face. "You set my leg," she said between bites. "I did. How does it feel?" Like it was broken and then set. But she managed a slight smile. "Better than it did, thank you. You are welcome." He sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted now that the crisis had passed. "You should heal, but it will take time. Probably 2 or 3 months before you can walk without support." Vorgha's smile faded. 2 or 3 months, maybe less. "You orcs heal faster than humans, I have heard. Still," she looked down at her bowl. "That is a long time. You will stay here. The cabin has supplies. When the weather clears, I can hunt. We will manage." She looked up at him sharply. "You would stay with me." Quinton realized he had assumed it without thinking. "Of course, I cannot leave you alone and injured." "Why not? You saved my life. You brought me to shelter. Your debt is paid, Quinton Xavier. You could leave now, go back to your people, and no one would blame you." "I would blame me." He met her eyes steadily. "And I do not want to leave." The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than their simple meaning. Vorgha set down her bowl carefully, never breaking eye contact. "You do not want to leave," she repeated slowly. "An orc woman in a cabin, you want to stay." "Yes. That is very foolish, probably. Your people will call you traitor, my people will call me worse." But there was hope in her voice, fragile and tentative. "If anyone finds out, then we will make sure no one finds out." Quinton reached out and took her hand, her green skin dark against his pale fingers. "At least for now. At least until you heal. After that, we can decide what comes next." Vorgha looked at their joined hands for a long moment. Then she turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. "I have never held a human's hand before, except when I was trying to kill them. I have never held an orc's hand for any reason, so this is a first for both of us. A good first, a very good first." She smiled, really smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look younger and softer. "Then I will stay. We will stay. For now." "For now," Quinton agreed, though some part of him was already wondering if "for now" might turn into something more permanent than either of them expected. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Quinton would wake early, build up the fire, and prepare breakfast from their limited supplies. Vorgha would do what exercises she could in bed, flexing her muscles and moving her upper body to keep from getting weak. They would eat together, and Quinton would check her leg, watching for signs of infection or improper healing. Then he would go out to hunt or gather wood, leaving Vorgha with water and food within reach, and the knife she insisted on keeping close despite his protests that she was safe. "Old habits," she said when he questioned it. "I feel vulnerable without a weapon." He understood that. The war had taught both of them to always be prepared, to never assume safety. So he let her keep the knife and went about his tasks, returning each day before sunset with whatever he had caught or found. In the evenings, they would talk. At first, the conversations were surface level, safe topics that skirted around anything too personal. Vorgha taught him words in the Orcish tongue, harsh syllables that he stumbled over while she laughed at his pronunciation. He taught her human songs, and discovered she had a lovely voice, deep and rich, that filled the cabin with unexpected beauty. They discussed hunting techniques, the differences between human and orc methods of tracking and stalking prey. They talked about the weather, about the animals they had seen, about the small domestic details of keeping the cabin warm and their bellies full. But gradually, as the days turned into a week and then two, the conversations deepened. Vorgha told him about growing up in the clans, about the harsh discipline and the even harsher landscape of the northern territories. She spoke of winters so cold that even orcs struggled to survive, of hunting parties that lasted weeks, of the constant vigilance required to keep the clan safe from predators and rival clans, and eventually, human soldiers pushing north into lands the orcs had held for generations. "We did not start the war," she said one night, staring into the fire. "Humans built a fort on sacred ground, ground where our ancestors are buried. We asked them to leave. They refused, so we attacked." "I heard that story differently," Quinton admitted. "We were told the orcs attacked a peaceful settlement without provocation." "Of course you were. And my people were told that humans wanted to exterminate us, push us out of our lands entirely." She shook her head. "Maybe both stories are true, maybe neither is. All I know is that people died and kept dying, and I still do not understand what any of it accomplished." "Nothing," Quinton said quietly. "It accomplished nothing except orphans and widows and soldiers who cannot sleep at night." "You have nightmares," Vorgha observed. "I hear you sometimes. You cry out in your sleep." He flushed, embarrassed. "Sorry, I try not to wake you. I am not bothered, I have nightmares too." She met his eyes. "What do you dream about?" Quinton hesitated, but something about the firelight and the safety of the cabin made him want to be honest. "Broken Ridge. The battle there was bad. We were outnumbered, surrounded. I watched friends die. Good men who should have gone home to their families. And I dream that I am back there and I cannot save them no matter what I do." "I dream about Ravenhold," Vorgha said softly. "I dream that I find my mother in time, that I reach her before the human blade does. But I never do. In the dream, I am always too late." They sat in silence for a moment, united by shared grief and trauma. Then Quinton reached out and took her hand again, as he had done increasingly often over the past days. She squeezed back, and the simple contact said what words could not. As the second week became the third, Quinton began to notice other things. The way Vorgha's eyes followed him when he moved around the cabin. The way she smiled when he came back from hunting. The way she always found excuses to touch him, brushing snow from his hair, adjusting his collar, examining a cut on his hand with more care than necessary. And he noticed his own behavior too. How he looked forward to returning to the cabin each day, to seeing her face light up when he walked through the door. How he had started bringing her small gifts, an interesting stone, a feather from a cardinal, wildflowers that had somehow survived the snow. How he sat closer to her each night, until they were pressed together on the narrow bed, sharing warmth and space like it was the most natural thing in the world. One evening, as they sat side by side, Vorgha turned to him abruptly. "Quinton, what are we doing?" "What do you mean?" "This." She gestured between them. "We are not just surviving anymore, this is something else, something more." Quinton's heart began to pound, but he forced himself to meet her eyes. "Is that a bad thing?" "I do not know." Vorgha's expression was troubled. "I am Orc. You are human. There is no future in this. When my leg heals, I will have to go back to my clan. You will return to your people. This thing between us, whatever it is, cannot continue." "Why not?" "Because humans and orcs do not do this. We do not love each other, we kill each other." "I do not want to kill you." Quinton said it firmly. "And I do not want to leave you. Vorgha, I care about you, more than I should, maybe, more than is wise, but I cannot help it." She stared at him, and he saw fear and hope warring in her expression. "You care about me?" "Yes. How much?" It was the moment of truth, the point where he could step back and make a safer choice. But Quinton had never been good at safe choices. "Enough that when I think about you leaving, it feels like losing something precious. Enough that I wake up every morning grateful you are here. Enough that I think I might be falling in love with you." Vorgha inhaled sharply. "You cannot say that." "Why not? It is true." "Because if you say it and I say it back, then this becomes real, and if it is real, then it will hurt when it ends. And if we never say it, we will spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been." Quinton took both her hands in his. "I know this is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons why it is impossible. But Vorgha, I do not care about any of that. I care about you." She was trembling now, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am scared. So am I. I have never felt this way before, not about anyone, and certainly not about a human." "What way?" He asked it softly, needing to hear her say it. "Like my heart is no longer entirely my own. Like you hold a part of it, and I do not want it back." Vorgha reached up and touched his face, her hand gentle despite its strength. "Like I could stay in this cabin forever if you stayed with me." Quinton turned his head and kissed her palm, a gesture so tender it made them both catch their breath. "Then stay. Even after your leg heals, stay. Where would we go? Not to human lands, they would kill me. Not to the clans, they would kill you. Then we will find somewhere new. Somewhere no one knows us as human or orc. Somewhere we can just be Quinton and Vorgha, two people who survived a storm together and decided not to say goodbye." "You would do that? Give up your people, your whole life for an orc?" "For you," he corrected. "I would do it for you." Vorgha made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and then she was pulling him closer, wrapping her arms around him. Quinton held her tight, burying his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her. They stayed like that for a long time, just holding each other, letting the weight of what they had admitted settle over them. When they finally pulled apart, Vorgha's eyes were wet but her smile was radiant. "This is very foolish, extremely foolish. We will probably die in the wilderness, trying to find this mythical place where no one cares about species. Probably. But I want to try." She said it firmly, decisively. "I want to try with you, Quinton Xavier. Then we will try." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then hesitated with his lips near hers. "May I?" "Yes." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, both of them hyper-aware of how different they were. Vorgha's tusks made the angle unfamiliar, and Quinton had to adjust to the feel of them against his face. But her lips were soft, and she tasted like honey from the tea he had made her, and when she sighed against his mouth, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. They broke apart slowly, foreheads resting together, both breathing hard. "That was unexpected," Vorgha murmured. Good unexpected. Very good unexpected. She kissed him again, more confidently this time, and Quinton let himself sink into it, into the impossible reality of kissing an orc woman and finding it more right than anything had ever felt. They spent that night tangled together, kissing and touching and exploring this new territory between them. They did not go further, both aware that Vorgha was still healing and that they needed time to understand what this meant. But they fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time since the war ended, Quinton did not have nightmares. The fourth week brought a thaw. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the creek that ran near the cabin swelled with runoff. Vorgha's leg was healing well, the swelling gone, and she could put weight on it for short periods, though she still needed support to walk. They began to plan. The Southern Territories, Quinton suggested one morning as they shared breakfast. Past the borderlands, there are villages that trade with everyone. Humans, orcs, even dwarves and elves. They are too far from the war zones to care much about old grudges. I have heard of these places. Vorgha nodded thoughtfully. The free towns, we call them. Where laws are made by councils, not kings or clan chiefs. It would be a long journey. Months, probably, but we have time. He reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture now as natural as breathing. We can travel slowly, let your leg finish healing along the way. Hunt and forage. Camp under the stars, like a great adventure. Exactly like a great adventure, he grinned at her. You and me against the world. I like the sound of that. But Vorgha's expression grew serious. Quinton, you understand what you are giving up. You will never be able to go home. Your family will not understand. Your friends will call you traitor. I know. He had thought about it extensively during the long watches while she slept. But home is not a place anymore. It is a person, and she is sitting across from me right now. Vorgha's eyes glistened. You say such things. How am I supposed to resist you when you say such things? You are not supposed to resist. You are supposed to love me back. I do. She said it simply, letting the words fill the cabin. I love you, Quinton Xavier. My strange, kind, stubborn human, I love you. Hearing it said aloud made something in Quinton's chest expand until he thought he might burst. I love you too, Vorgha. I love you so much it scares me. Good. We should both be scared. Keeps us alert. But she was grinning, radiant with happiness. They spent the rest of the morning preparing for the journey. Quinton inventoried their supplies, taking only what they could carry, and leaving the rest for the next traveler who might need the cabin. Vorgha fashioned a walking stick from a sturdy branch, testing her weight on it and nodding with satisfaction. I can manage, she said. Slowly, but I can manage. Then we leave tomorrow, first light. That night they made love for the first time. It was awkward and tender and punctuated with nervous laughter as they figured out how their different bodies fit together. But it was also beautiful, an affirmation of everything they had promised each other, a physical joining that sealed the emotional bond they had been building for weeks. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Vorgha traced patterns on Quinton's chest. In orc culture, when two people decide to be together, they exchange tokens, something that represents their commitment. What kind of tokens? Usually something made by hand. Something that took effort and thought. She hesitated. I have nothing to give you. I lost everything when I fell. That is not true. Quinton reached up and touched her face, running his fingers along the strong line of her jaw. You gave me yourself. You gave me a future I never imagined having. That is enough. Still, I want to give you something tangible, something you can hold. Vorgha thought for a moment, then reached down and pulled a small bone bead from her hair. It was intricately carved with whorls and patterns, beautiful in its simplicity. This was my mother's. She wore it into battle, It kept her safe for many years until it did not, but it still has meaning, history, and I want you to have it." Quinton took the bead reverently, feeling the weight of the gift. "Are you sure?" "Very sure. You are my future now. You should carry a piece of my past." "Then I have something for you too." Quinton got up and rummaged in his pack until he found what he was looking for, a small knife in a worn leather sheath. "This was my father's. He gave it to me when I left for the war. He said as long as I carried it, a piece of him would always be with me. I want you to have that now, a piece of my past to carry into our future." Vorgha accepted the knife with solemnity, running her thumb over the smooth handle. "These are good gifts, meaningful gifts. Then we are truly committed, no backing out now." "I would never back out." She pulled him down for a kiss. "You are stuck with me, Quinton Xavier, for better or worse. I will take those odds." They left the cabin at dawn, stepping out into a world that smelled of thawing earth and new growth. The journey south began slowly, with Quinton supporting Vorgha and both of them adjusting to the rhythm of travel. But as the hours passed, Vorgha grew stronger, relying less on the walking stick and more on her own recovering muscles. They walked through forests still heavy with winter, crossing streams swollen with melt and climbing ridges that offered views of the vast wilderness stretching in all directions. At night, they made camp under the stars, and Quinton taught Vorgha how to build a fire the way his father had shown him, while she taught him how to read the wind and predict the next day's weather. It felt like shedding old skins, leaving behind the soldier and the warrior, becoming simply two people walking toward a new life. On the 5th day, they encountered their first test. They were following a game trail through a dense section of forest when Quinton heard voices ahead. He raised a hand and Vorgha froze beside him, both of them listening intently. Human voices. Male, at least 3 of them. "Hunters," Quinton whispered. "We should go around." But before they could retreat, the voices grew louder and 3 men emerged from the trees ahead. They were rough-looking, dressed in patched clothing and carrying bows. Their eyes widened when they saw Quinton and Vorgha together. "Well now," one of them said slowly, a big man with a scarred face. "What do we have here? A human and an orc, walking together like it is the most natural thing in the world." "We do not want trouble," Quinton said carefully, positioning himself slightly in front of Vorgha. "Just passing through our territory." Another man, lean and mean-looking, spat on the ground. "And why is a human protecting an orc? That is unnatural, that is. She is with me. We are traveling together." Quinton kept his voice level. "Let us pass and we will be gone." "Can't do that." The scarred man grinned, showing missing teeth. "See, there is a bounty on orc heads. Has been since the war ended. You bring in proof of a dead orc, you get 5 silver pieces. 5 silver is a lot of money out here." Quinton's hand went to his knife, and he felt Vorgha tense beside him. "You are not touching her. Awful protective of a monster." The third man, younger than the others, circled around to the side. "Makes a man wonder what you have been doing with her." "That is none of your concern." Quinton drew his knife and Vorgha pulled the bone blade from her belt. "Last warning, walk away, 3 against 2. And one of them is a cripple." The scarred man drew his own knife. "I like those odds." They attacked. Quinton met the first man's rush, deflecting the knife thrust and slamming his elbow into the man's jaw. The scarred man staggered back, and Quinton pressed his advantage, years of combat training taking over. He vaguely aware of Vorgha beside him, moving with surprising speed despite her injured leg, blocking the younger man's attack and driving her fist into his stomach. The lean man tried to flank them, but Vorgha spun, her walking stick whipping around to crack against his knee. He went down with a scream, and she followed up with a kick that sent him sprawling. The scarred man recovered and came at Quinton again, this time with more caution. They circled each other, blades flashing in the dappled sunlight. Quinton could hear Vorgha fighting behind him, grunts and thuds that told him she was holding her own, but he could not risk looking away from his opponent. The man lunged. Quinton sidestepped and slashed, his blade scoring a line across the man's arm. The man cursed and swung wildly, and Quinton ducked under it, coming up inside his guard to punch him hard in the throat. The scarred man dropped his knife, clutching at his neck, and Quinton kicked him in the chest, sending him crashing into a tree. He went down and stayed down. Quinton spun to see Vorgha standing over the two remaining men, both of whom were on the ground groaning. Her eyes were fierce, her tusks bared in a snarl that would have terrified anyone with sense. "Are you hurt?" Quinton asked urgently. "Bruised, you?" "Same." He looked at the three men, making sure none of them were reaching for weapons. "We need to go, now." They gathered their packs and left at a fast walk, putting distance between themselves and the hunters. Only when they were miles away did Quinton finally let himself relax. "That was close," he said. "Too close." Vorgha leaned on her walking stick, breathing hard. "There will be others. Bounty hunters, people who see me as a monster or a prize. Then we will deal with them." Quinton took her hand. "Together, like we dealt with those three. You fought well. For a human," she grinned, and the tension broke. "You fought well for an orc with a broken leg." "Healing leg," she corrected. "Almost completely healed now, in fact. Those men helped test it." They made camp early that night, both exhausted from the fight and the adrenaline crash that followed. As they sat by the fire, Quinton found himself thinking about what the hunters had said. "Do you regret this?" he asked quietly. "Coming with me? It would be easier if you were with your clan." "Easier does not mean better." Vorgha leaned against him. "I chose you, Quinton. I chose this life, and I do not regret it for a moment, even when people try to kill you for being with me. Especially then, because it proves we are doing something radical, something that scares them." She tilted her head to look at him. "The world wants us to be enemies. Every time we choose to love instead, we win." Quinton kissed her temple. "When did you become so wise?" "I was always wise." "You were just too human to notice." They traveled for 3 more weeks, moving steadily south as Vorgha's leg finished healing and the weather grew warmer. They passed through regions where winter still clung to the high places, but spring was blooming in the valleys, painting the world in shades of green and gold. They avoided settlements when they could, but occasionally they had to stop to trade for supplies. These encounters were always tense, with Quinton doing the talking while Vorgha waited at the edge of town, hidden but ready to flee if necessary. He hated leaving her behind, hated the way she had to hide what she was, but they both knew it was necessary for survival. One evening, as they camped beside a river swollen with spring runoff, Vorgha suddenly said, "Tell me about your family." Quinton was surprised by the question. They had talked about many things, but rarely about the people they had left behind. "Not much to tell. My father was a farmer. Good man, hard worker, dead now. My mother remarried after he died, moved to the southern provinces. I have not seen her in 5 years. You miss her, sometimes. But we were never close after the war. She could not understand why I volunteered, thought I was throwing my life away for nothing." He stared into the fire. "Maybe she was right. You are here with me. That is not nothing." "No," he agreed, smiling. "It is definitely not nothing. What about your family, dead or scattered?" "My father may still be alive, but I do not know where he is. My brothers are dead. My mother is dead. The clan I grew up with split apart after the war, some going deeper north, some trying to integrate with the human territories." Vorgha's expression was distant. "I have no family now except you. Then we are both starting fresh." Quinton moved closer to her, "Building something new from nothing." "I like that idea. A fresh start." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "When we reach the free towns, what will we do? How will we live? I can hunt. You can craft. Between us, we should be able to make a living." Quinton had been thinking about this question for days. Maybe we find a small piece of land, build a home, raise animals, grow crops, live quietly. That sounds peaceful. Too peaceful. No, Vorgha smiled. I have had enough excitement for one lifetime. Peaceful sounds perfect. They reached the southern territories in the 6th week of travel. The landscape changed as they walked, becoming gentler, the mountains giving way to rolling hills and wide valleys. They began to see more settlements, villages that looked prosperous and well-maintained, with walls that were clearly decorative rather than defensive. And for the first time, they saw other interspecies couples. It started as a shock. They were passing through a market in a small town, Vorgha keeping her head down and her hood up, when Quinton spotted a human woman walking hand in hand with an orc man. He stopped dead, staring, and Vorgha followed his gaze. "That is unusual," she murmured. "Very unusual." As they explored the market, they saw more. A dwarf and a human running a stall together. An elf and an orc arguing cheerfully over the price of pottery. Everywhere, people of different species mixing freely, trading, talking, laughing together. "I think we found it," Quinton said, wonder in his voice. "I think we found the place where we can just be ourselves." Vorgha lowered her hood slowly, revealing her green skin and tusks. A few people glanced at her, but no one reacted with fear or anger. One woman, human with gray hair, even smiled and nodded in greeting. "This is real," Vorgha whispered. "This is actually real." They found an inn that evening, and for the first time since leaving the cabin, they slept in a real bed in a real room, the door locked against the world. Vorgha cried that night, overwhelmed by relief and joy, and Quinton held her, murmuring reassurances and promises into her hair. "We made it," he kept saying. "We actually made it." "I did not think we would." Vorgha clutched him tight. "I thought it was a dream, a beautiful dream that would end badly. It is not a dream, and it is not ending." Quinton pulled back to look at her. "This is our beginning, Vorgha. The start of everything." They spent a week in the town, which was called Greenhollow, getting their bearings and learning the customs. They discovered that the free towns operated under a charter that guaranteed equal rights to all species, with strict penalties for discrimination or violence based on race. The governance was handled by an elected council that included representatives from every major group in the region. It was not perfect. There were still tensions, still people who clung to old prejudices. But it was better than anything either of them had known, a place where they could walk together in daylight without fear. Quinton found work as a hunter, providing meat to the inns and butcher shops. Vorgha apprenticed herself to a bone carver, an elderly orc man who was delighted to teach his craft to someone with natural talent. They rented a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but clean and dry, with room for a garden and a workshop. They built a life. It was not always easy. There were days when Quinton missed his old life, the simplicity of knowing where he fit. There were nights when Vorgha woke from nightmares about her clan casting her out, calling her traitor. They fought sometimes, usually about small things that were really about the larger stresses of building something so unprecedented. But they always made up. They always remembered why they had chosen this, why they had walked away from everything familiar to be together. And slowly, day by day, the life they were building stopped feeling strange and started feeling like home. 6 months after arriving in Greenhollow, Quinton came home from a hunting trip to find Vorgha in the workshop, bent over a piece of bone she was carving with intense concentration. He watched her for a moment, admiring the way the afternoon light caught in her hair, the strength and grace in her hands as she worked. "What are you making?" he asked finally. Vorgha jumped, then turned with a smile. "You are back early. Good hunting. Brought down a buck within an hour." He crossed to her and kissed her cheek. "So what are you making? You will see when it is done." But there was a secretive smile on her face that made him curious. He found out 3 days later. Vorgha presented him with 2 matching bracelets, carved from white bone, and engraved with interlocking patterns that symbolized unity and permanence. In Orc culture, when 2 people decide to commit fully, to bind their lives together permanently, they exchange bracelets, she explained, holding them out nervously. "It is the equivalent of your human marriage. I made these for us, if you want them." Quinton stared at the bracelets, feeling emotion well up in his chest. "Are you asking me to marry you in the Orc way? Yes, I am asking you to be my mate, my partner, my forever." Vorgha met his eyes steadily. "What do you say, Quinton Xavier?" He did not trust himself to speak. Instead, he took one of the bracelets and slipped it onto her wrist, fitting it carefully over her strong hand. Then he held out his own wrist, waiting. Vorgha's eyes shimmered with tears as she fastened the second bracelet onto him. The bone was smooth and cool, the fit perfect, and when it was secured, Quinton felt like something fundamental had shifted, like he had stepped through a door into a new version of his life. "I say yes," he finally managed. "Yes to everything. Yes to forever with you." Vorgha pulled him into a fierce embrace, and they stood there in the workshop, holding each other, both overwhelmed by the enormity of what they had just done. They were married now, by the standards of her people, bonded permanently. A human and an Orc choosing each other against all odds and all expectations. "We should celebrate," Quinton said when they finally pulled apart. "Tell people, make it official. I already told my mentor. He was very happy, said it was about time." Vorgha laughed, wiping her eyes. "I think the whole town has been waiting for us to make it formal." They held a small ceremony a week later, blending human and Orc traditions into something uniquely theirs. The Orc priest spoke blessings in the old language, and a human officiant from the town council formalized their union under local law. Friends they had made came to witness, bringing food and gifts and good wishes. It was nothing like the grand weddings Quinton had seen in his youth, but it was perfect for them, intimate and meaningful. That night, as they lay in bed in their little house, Quinton traced the bracelet on Vorgha's wrist. "Do you ever think about that night, the storm, all the time?" "I think about how I was ready to die, how I had accepted it, and then you appeared with your blanket and your stubborn kindness. I almost walked away. Did I ever tell you that? I almost left you there. But you did not. You chose to help, and everything after came from that one choice." Vorgha turned to face him fully. "That is the thing about choices, I think. We never know which ones will change everything. You saved my life, and in doing so, you saved your own. We saved each other." "We saved each other," Quinton agreed. "And we built something neither of us could have built alone. A life, a home, a future." Vorgha kissed him softly. "I love you, Quinton Xavier, my husband, my heart." "I love you too, Vorgha, my wife, my everything." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and if Quinton dreamed that night, it was of green fields and summer sun, of a woman with tusks and kind eyes who laughed at his terrible jokes, of a life they had fought for and won. The years passed gently in Greenhollow. Quinton became known as one of the best hunters in the region, his skills honed by war and wilderness combined. Vorgha's bone carvings gained recognition, sought after for their beauty and craftsmanship. They saved money, expanded their house, added a proper workshop and a larger garden. In the 3rd year of their marriage, Vorgha told him she was pregnant. Quinton had not known such a thing was possible. Human Orc couples were rare enough that there was little documentation about whether they could even have children together. But Vorgha's body told the truth, and the midwife confirmed it with a smile. "Life finds a way," the midwife said, a cheerful dwarf woman named Brenna. "Love finds a way. Congratulations." The pregnancy was difficult. Vorgha's body struggled with the hybrid child, and there were complications that kept them both terrified for months. But she was strong, stubborn in the way that had kept her alive through war and broken bones and freezing storms, and she refused to give up. Their daughter was born on a spring morning, arriving with a furious cry that announced her presence to the world. She had green skin like her mother and her father's eyes, small tusks just beginning to emerge, and pointed ears that twitched with every sound. She was beautiful and strange and absolutely perfect. They named her Kira, a name that meant light in both the human and orc tongues. Quinton held his daughter for the first time and felt his entire world realign around her tiny, squirming form. She is so small. She will grow. Vorgha, exhausted but radiant, smiled from the bed. She will be strong. A bridge between worlds like we are. A bridge, Quinton repeated softly, looking at Kira's face. I like that. She will have a better world than we did. No war, no hatred, just possibility. We will make sure of it, Vorgha promised. They raised Kira with love and patience, teaching her about both her heritages. Quinton told her human stories and songs, while Vorgha taught her orc traditions and crafts. They taught her to be proud of what she was, a child of two worlds, belonging fully to both and bound by neither. Greenhullo embraced her. She grew up playing with children of all species, learning early that the differences between people were superficial compared to the things that united them. She was clever and kind, with her mother's stubbornness and her father's gentle heart. When Kira was 5, Quinton took her hunting for the first time. She was too young to carry a weapon, but she walked beside him through the forest, her small hand in his, learning to read tracks and signs. "Papa," she asked at one point, "why do some people stare at us?" "Because we are different," Quinton said honestly. "You, me, your mother, we are not what people expect." "Is different bad?" "No, sweetheart. Different is just different. Some people fear it because they do not understand. But fear can be overcome with knowledge and kindness." Kira thought about this seriously. "So we should be kind to people who stare." "Exactly. We show them that different does not mean dangerous. We show them that love is love, no matter what form it takes." "I can do that," Kira announced confidently. "I am very good at being kind." Quinton smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Yes, you are. You are very good at it." More years passed. Kira grew into a remarkable young woman, tall and strong like her mother, with her father's thoughtfulness and compassion. She became a healer, studying under the town's physician and showing a natural talent for the work. She fell in love with a human boy from a neighboring town, and when she brought him home to meet her parents, Quinton saw in the boy's eyes the same wonder and determination he had felt all those years ago, when he wrapped an orc woman in his blanket and chose kindness over fear. "He is a good man," Vorgha observed after the boy had left. "He is," Quinton agreed. "He looks at her the way I look at you. Then he has my blessing. Though I reserve the right to intimidate him occasionally, it is a mother's privilege." Quinton laughed and pulled his wife close, marveling at how natural it still felt after all these years. They stood on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over Greenhullo, and he thought about the unlikely journey that had brought them here. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your clan, your people, for this life? Never." Vorgha said it without hesitation. "I gained far more than I lost. I gained you. I gained Kira. I gained a home where I can be myself without apology. What clan could give me that? I feel the same way about giving up my old life." Quinton kissed her temple. "This is better. This is right. We built something good, did we not? Something that will outlast us." We built something extraordinary." He gestured at the town spread out before them, at the mix of species living and working together, at the future they had helped create just by choosing to love. And it started with one blanket on one cold night, and a decision to be kind when it would have been easier to walk away. "Frost would have killed by morning," Vorgha said softly. "We both would have died that night if you had not come back, if you had not shared your warmth. But I did come back, and you shared your blanket, and somehow, impossibly, we built a life." Quinton tightened his arm around her. "The best life I could have imagined." They stood together as the stars began to emerge, two souls who had found each other in the midst of cold and darkness, and refused to let go. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, faced prejudice and danger and doubt, and emerged stronger for it. Their story would be told in Greenhollow for generations, passed down as an example of what was possible when people chose love over fear. The human who wrapped an orc woman in his blanket and kept watch through the killing frost. The orc woman who shared her warmth with a man who should have been her enemy. The couple who built a bridge between worlds and raised a daughter to walk across it with her head held high. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered. Not the war that had tried to keep them apart. Not the prejudice that had told them they were impossible. Just two people who survived a frozen night together and decided that survival was only the beginning. They had built a home, a family, a legacy of kindness in a world that desperately needed it. And as Quinton held Vorgha close under the emerging stars, he knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again, 1,000 times over. He had given her his blanket and kept watch through the frost, and she had given him everything in return. Her trust, her love, her forever. It was more than enough. It was everything. The story of how they came together had a happy ending, but the life they lived was not an ending at all. It was a beginning that kept unfolding, day by day, moment by moment, choice by choice. A beginning that would continue through Kira and her children, through every person in Greenhollow who saw them, and understood that different kinds of love were possible, through every individual who heard their story and felt hope kindle in their chest. Quinton Xavier and Vorgha had survived the frost, and in surviving they had helped thaw a frozen world, one warm moment at a time. That was their triumph. That was their gift. That was the legacy they would leave behind when, many years later, they passed from the world together, hands clasped and hearts content, knowing they had lived fully and loved completely. But that ending was still far in the future. For now, they simply stood on their porch as the stars wheeled overhead, holding each other close, grateful for every moment they had fought for and won. The night was warm. The world was kind, and they were home, together, always together. Exactly as they had promised on that cold night so many years ago, when frost had threatened to kill them both by morning, and love had kept them alive instead.